Okay. And welcome. Today we joining Mark, Finton and myself. We have Orlando all the way from New Zealand. He is an NLP coaching trainer. I hope that's right. He does human design as well, something on those sort of lines it's called. And he's also the creator of NLP Fusion. Welcome, Orlando.
Oh, thank you, Rich and Mark and Finton. It's good to be here.
We appreciate you coming.
Nice to see you.
Orlando, what was the main reason behind you learning NLP?
Number one, when I first came across it, 1996, was in a sales environment. And I met somebody that was and still is the most exquisite salesperson and closer that I've ever come across in my life. And I realized that he had skills that I didn't. So I pursued him until he gave me a brochure, which read NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming for Business Communications. I had no idea what the hell that meant, but I picked up a telephone and I booked into the introduction for it, because what I did know it meant was whatever he was doing, if I was to be able to learn that, I could spend a lot less time selling a whole lot more. And in my early 20s, I had other things to be doing other than working.
Cool. What made him so exquisite about selling and closing the deals?
Well, at the time, I had no idea. What I knew is GT would sit down with a client. He would literally begin talking to them about something completely unrelated. And then it was almost like he'd go off on a tangent. And then somehow 5 minutes later, the whole demeanor had changed from the client. The whole direction had changed. And people that were ready to walk out the door were thanking him for his assistance in keeping him there. And it was just phenomenal. And I didn't know, I had no idea what he was doing, but I knew I wanted to know.
Cool. And so when did you go from that curiosity to actually learning about NLP? To go away on a course somewhere, or how did it transpire?
Well, at the time I was based in Wellington, New Zealand, the capital city, down about the center of the country. And Graham gave me the brochure for the course. So it was a one-day introduction being held up in Auckland, which is about 500 mile north. So I literally, I caught a bus or a coach, I think you call it here, and traveled up the island. And I literally went to the seminar or the introduction that day. Was so blown away that I signed up to do a practitioner of NLP for business communication in Auckland City, which back then the prac was done over long weekends, over 4 months, which I knew would mean relocating to another city. Travel wasn't an option for me. So I made all those decisions in that day, and that evening traveled back to Wellington and went about just making a few changes to move my life 500 miles north.
Sounds like a good plan.
As you do.
Yeah. So your understanding of NLP from doing that business communications course, how has that changed, expanded for you over this time period?
Well, very much. The course the way that it was taught back then was that here's a huge amount of information. A lot of it very digital, a lot of it very mechanical, and there was a technique for doing each different thing you wanted to do. And a lot of it did tie into sales processes that were being used at the time and systems that were being used in businesses. And quite frankly, I think those really haven't changed too much, even in the last 25 years. At the end of the day, the features and the benefits and whether the client, what's in it for the client, all these things are just as important as they were then. And the training that I did initially was to learn those techniques to use in a sales environment, which skyrocketed my sales figures. It was never a course for any other use of the toolkit called NLP in personal change work, personal development, therapy, change work, none of those things, even performance enhancement, was only constricted to business. It was over the years that I found that more and more people were coming to me, asking me for my advice on not what to do, but what I had done with someone else that I'd spoken to. and I had no idea what I'd done. But a lot of what I was doing, in a nutshell, it was using a variety of skills that were garnered from practicing techniques over and over again, putting them together in what seemed logical processes that people would gain positive outcomes from. During that period of time, I was also, you got to remember back in 96, 97, YouTube didn't exist. You couldn't go on the internet unless you had 5 minutes to dial up. And you certainly couldn't do it from a phone. They were still attached to the wall. We were just getting cell phones. So information on the topic of NLP was very difficult to get hold of. Hypnosis was something that I started looking into because there seemed to be a link there, and a few of the people like Richard Bandler and John Grinder had both spoken of hypnosis in books that I had read. So I started reading books on hypnosis and hypnotic language, but still very much with an emphasis on sales. But I started to, my view of the world was starting to open, if you like, that I was seeing that people were using these skills in other areas, but I didn't really have a roadmap. Nor did I have a great desire to do so. I was quite happy living my life and enjoying sales. And then I got into small business ownership, and then did that for a few years, or a decade and a half. It wasn't until 2016 when I met Dr. Richard Bandler in Florida that suddenly the generalization of those skills was phenomenal. And I was like, this is far beyond sales. This is well beyond business, which I still use the skills in both sales and business because I run a business and I sell things. So yes, I use the skills that I'm going to be teaching. And then when I'm teaching the skills, I use the skills that I'm teaching to teach what I'm teaching.
Yeah. On that course, Orlando, going all that way back then, was it expected of people just to use that as prescribed on that course, or were you given up freedom of movement to use it how you expected to use it?
Well, everybody that I mean, there was about 19, I think it was 19 or 20 people doing the course as students at the time, and 50% of the people in that room were there because they had been sponsored by their company to go and do this sales training effectively. A lot of them saw it as. The other 10 people, including me, the other half, we'd taken ourselves along, and I don't recall anyone not being in a sales or training role. So the entire course and the entire skill set was about teaching people things in a sales environment and as a corporate trainer, if you like. Where different companies had trainers that would deliver material, and these were skills for delivering that material.
Yeah. Was it prescribed that this is the model and this is how you do it, or was there kind of flexibility in how you were expected to use that model?
Well, there was plenty of flexibility. All questions were answered as best as the trainer, Roger Diener, at the time was able to answer them. But again, the focus was on sales, business. They were not presenting the other areas it could be in, but then the course was very much set up as a NLP for business communication.
Yeah. And what's your favorite methods or techniques that you've learned throughout the years of this?
Well, the official answer as a trainer is my favorite technique or skill is the one that works for the client. That's the official line. Mm-hmm. The unofficial line is submodalities and using moving time with language. Between submodalities and time, there's really not much that you cannot influence. Mm-hmm. And I thoroughly enjoy using both.
Yeah, what is so good specifically about using those to influence people?
Well, as I gained an understanding of, and again, this is one of the big themes for me, as submodalities was something that resonated very deeply for me, because to me, learning about eye access and cues, learning about how language, sensory-based language, that is, in visual, auditory, kinesthetic-based language, anaphylactory and gustatory as well, and how that translated into submodalities was a game changer for me, realizing this is how I do thinking. Like I was actually became aware of different forms of thought. Sometimes I'd be talking to myself. Sometimes I'd talk to myself from different directions and different voices. Other times I would literally be seeing a process go through or thinking an event through. And what that would mean was I'd be watching the movie of a possible outcome of how it could go. And to become aware of how I would process thoughts from feeling to feeling to feeling through my body, literally visceral feelings, suddenly thinking made sense. It was the closest thing to a user manual for this brain that I'd ever come across. And I was just fascinated. I was like very, very quickly, from the time where I learned about submodalities, I was able to change my perspective internally and therefore externally dramatically and really quickly. And then I was able to describe things to other people in such a way that they understood it better in a way that they wanted to understand it. And as a salesperson, that's a great lead in to having someone purchase something when they can see themselves with your product feeling really, really good. And they can also see themselves without your product being very sad. Not quite as explicit as that, but sometimes yes.
Yeah.
And in my own experience, it was a game changer, absolute game changer.
Would you mind giving an explanation as to what submodalities are, please?
Sure. In many different things, including neuro-linguistic programming, big, long words to describe things sometimes. Representation systems are the 5 senses of the body, are how we represent internally the world that is external to us. That is, we see things, we hear things, we feel things, we taste it, and we smell things. In NLP descriptive language, in the NLP model, these are known as rep systems or representation systems: visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, and gustatory. Each one of those rep systems has got finer distinctions within it, and these are known as submodalities. I don't know why. I don't know why it's not representation systems and sub-representation systems, or modalities and submodalities, but I honestly don't know why. But for each modality, for example, visual, for the representation of visual, we can make finer distinctions, like if we're imagining something in our mind, is that the color or black and white? Is the thought near or far away? Is it a big picture or a small picture? Is it a picture or a movie? The way it's breaking down the componentry or the coding of that representation system and how we're internally referencing things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty comprehensively spoken about, yeah.
Yeah.
As we asked you to come on to talk about your NLP Fusion course, what was the inspiration behind you developing that and bringing that to life, as it were?
Well, it very much ties into your earlier questioning about my path, my journey of learning, if you like, with regards to neuro-linguistic programming was very much initially in sales and in teaching other people things. I'd never in my wildest dreams did I think of doing any form of therapy or change work or personal development or coaching. That was never on the radar for me. I just wanted to get really good at sales so I didn't have to work very much and I got paid lots. I was a pretty simple guy in that approach.
Sounds like a good plan.
Well, it worked out pretty good for me. My early 20s were awesome and they got better. But it was really when I started reading, when I widened my learning from what I had done in the course, and I started reading about hypnosis, and then you start getting in the topics of things like meditation and personal development. And back in the early 2000s, you couldn't turn the television on without seeing Tony Robbins with cassette tapes for sale, that you could personal power cassette tapes. And I started consuming a lot of that type of content. A lot of seminars and a lot of motivational speakers that I could get my hands on, and I can't remember their names, a myriad of different people. But I started consuming a lot of information where people were using sometimes NLP skills, sometimes hypnosis skills, or a mixture of, or they were in personal development, but they seemed to be using these skills. And I was just interested. I was my curiosity had gone through the roof, and I was just devouring any information that I could get. And the more and more I learned, the more I realized that the skills of NLP is not a specific thing. I mean, it's a model, but it's a meta discipline, if you like. It's a model that can be overlaid into any form of human interaction or behavior. Now, because it can be overlaid into any form of interaction or behavior, you can take NLP skills and enhance the way you communicate, behave, and teach in a sales environment. You can enhance in a therapy environment. You can enhance in a sporting environment. You can enhance in a parenting environment. And suddenly my brain went nuts. I was like, hang on, where can you not use this? As long as there's at least one brain, it works. And I like to think that I had one. My parents were pretty convinced there was a lot of sawdust in there. But
most of us, Orlando.
Say again?
I think that goes for most of us.
But it was very much when 2018, when I traveled over to the UK and was directly studying clinical hypnotherapy over here, as well as doing a few other things. And I was thinking about, what next? Constantly thinking, what's the purpose? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's further along in the direction that I'm heading? Because I knew exactly what the direction was. I just didn't have all the specifics laid out. And I was okay with that. I'd made that decision. And what I saw inside my mind was creating a business whereby these skills would be overlaid and working with other modalities, other therapies, other disciplines. It may be difficult for you to believe by the snapshot looking at me, but I'm no great sports person. I played competitive underwater hockey when I was a young fella, but I've never been an athlete of sorts, as it were. And I don't generally work with athletes, but that's not to say that the skills aren't applicable. And when I have worked with athletes, it's very easy to work with the skills at a structural level. They provide the content. Now, a conversation about sports that like the one we're having now, and that realization, working at the structural level, they provide the content. I can work with a tradesperson who's really good at their trade, and I'm not able to do their trade, but I can work on the structure of how they're thinking, how they're acting, how they're planning, how they're goal planning, how they're structuring their business. And I can help them enhance their business, their lifestyle, their relationships with their family, friends, kids, etc., at a structural level for how they're doing what they're doing. If you got a builder that doesn't know how to do building, the NLP is not going to help them be a builder, but it will help them learn from other builders more quickly. Having the skills of being able to learn how you learn yourself and then expand your own abilities in your own learning gives you the opportunity to learn even when you've got a crappy teacher. And one of my motivations is when I was at school, I clearly remember the really good teachers I had. And I had lots of others that I don't remember. And no offense to them, but they made no impact on me whatsoever that's memorable for me. Then I came across very soon after being in the UK, I was very fortunate to meet actually Kate Benson, the Director of Education internationally for the Society of NLP. And I asked Kate a question. I said, how do you describe what you do? And I asked a lot of people this question because in our industry, it's a bit of a funny one for a lot of people. And she, without a hesitation, turned around and she said, I teach teachers how to teach. They go to college, they go to university, and they learn what to teach and the curriculums and the standards and the paperwork and all of that that's required to work in that environment, but they are not taught how to do teaching effectively. She said, so I decided that was my job. And from a teaching background, that's exactly, she met Dr. Bandler, she started training, working with him, training with him initially and then working with him. And she asked him a question one day, if NLP is so good at teaching and learning, why are we not using, because she said, sorry, you say that you use NLP to teach NLP and that's highly effective. Why are we not using NLP to teach everything else? And Richard turned to Kate and said, "That's a very good question. You should find out."
Very considerate of him.
So she did.
Yeah.
And 20, 30 years later, forgive me, Kate, if I'm aging you there, but I think 20 years, 30 years later, 3 decades of work. And she has touched the lives of thousands of teachers, and I have no doubt hundreds of thousands of students by using the skills in a specific area.
Mm-hmm. All right, going back to say, you said you've been really curious about this. How have you maintained that curiosity and fascination with the subject?
Wow, that's a big question. How do I maintain that? Well, in simplest terms, from the first introduction I did with NLP, it opened my mind and I realized how much about the topic I didn't know. And the more I learned about the topic, the more I realized I didn't know. And then suddenly all these other topics came out the side of personal development and hypnosis and hypnotherapy and hypnotic language and design human engineering. And then the physicality side of it, body work and patterns of physical transformation and how our physiology and the body and the mind and the holistic view. And every time I'd learn something, I'd realize there was just more I just didn't know. And I just get greedy. I want to know stuff. I love learning. Not a statement that I would have made under the age of 16 or 17. Unfortunately, that wasn't my experience of schooling. But when I got out of school, even before I came across the NLP, I found that when something interested me, I wanted to know more. And I became more and more interested, and that curiosity and the motivation was really easy when I was interested in what it was. Mm-hmm. A lot of what I'd been taught previously, I didn't know what it was, and I had no connection to it. I mean, I'm 46 years of age. I don't think I've ever used algebra in my life. Used a little bit of trigonometry. I don't even know what the other words are that I didn't learn in maths because I wasn't there. And I think that's a real shame because mathematics is brilliant. If you want to own a business, anyone that doesn't like maths, as soon as you see a profit and loss report and profit, you'll start enjoying maths. But, these are skills that it depends on what the association is. And unfortunately, when someone said maths, I got a really bad feeling. I didn't even care what it was. I had a bad feeling. Well, when maths meant something different to me, I got a really good feeling. And I wanted to know more about what was useful to me. And there is very little in the realms of NLP, hypnotic language, and hypnosis that I've learned that is not in some way, shape, or form been useful for me. And so I want more. Because no one knows everything. I used to, but then I turned 17.
Yeah. If you don't mind asking, what's been your most rewarding case you've had?
The most rewarding case that I've had. A few years ago, I was presenting at a conference and of professionals, medical professionals, and there was a lady there whom just before the lunch break, I felt the need to go and have a conversation with. And I literally went and got my lunch and I came back in and there was a few of them there and she was having her lunch. And there was just something that had tripped in my brain when I was on the stage, started a conversation, some very unrelated content to the conference was discussed between her and I. And whilst stuffing my food with stuffing my face with food and a meal being had, indirectly through conversation, because there were other people around and it wasn't relevant to ask direct questions, so very much content free, She learned something incredibly valuable about herself that I found that out later on when she came up to me and said, I've learned something very incredibly useful for myself. And I spoke with her about a week later online, and her life had completely changed. And the reason it was most rewarding is, for me, it was an indicator. Like, one of the little catchphrases I've had since I've started learning these skills is my goal is NLP anywhere, anytime. Being able to use the skills anywhere and everywhere and all of the time to somebody's advantage. Even if it's walking into a cafe, I want the barista having a good day. You know, I like people. I like it even more when they smile, especially if they're taking the time to make me a cup of coffee. Even if they're paid for it, I still want them to feel good. I want them to make a yummy coffee, if nothing else, right? And it was one of those milestones for me of being able to work with somebody at a very profound level for that person, while the others around us had no idea what was going on. And I, to this day, still don't know what the problem was. And I didn't want to know. I don't care what the problem was. What I wanted to know is that she was better after the experience. And then a week later, in her words, her entire world had changed. And I'm still in contact with that person, although on the other side of the world through social media and what have you, living a fantastically fun life. And that's awesome. Like that really lights my fire. I love seeing people succeed, whatever that means to them. And you know, to me, yeah. And it was a wonderfully rewarding experience. Yeah.
Yeah. Because after all, they are the experts of their life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the plan.
It is. Yeah, there's no good go around dictating to somebody you got to live this way or that way.
No, I agree with that. I don't think that's a good idea at all. You know, people say to me, "Well, what do you think I should do?" And I say to them, I don't think you should ask me that question. I have a wonderful imagination and a wicked sense of humor. You know, I think that you should drive your bus. I don't think you should have me driving your bus. I think that's a bad plan. I've got my own bus to drive. I can't multitask to that degree. I do believe that people should be able to make decisions and live their life on their terms and have a measure of control of their life. We can't control everything that goes on around us all of the time, but we can choose how we think about everything. And choice is freedom.
Yeah, definitely.
That was an excellent point that Orlando made there. And that there's a phrase they say, you can't control everything that happens to you in life, but you can control your response to it. And I think that's what NLP has helped me do.
Yeah, well, speaking to that, Finton, a lot of people do not have they're not aware of the gap between the stimulus and the response. That is, somebody says something to them and they find themselves responding, or something happens and then I feel like this. Well, there is actually a moment in between, but for a lot of people, that moment's incredibly compressed. And working with people and slowing things down and having them be aware of that process, creating a little space and time in between there gives them the opportunity to hear something and then pause and go, how do I want to react? What do I want my next feeling to be? And it takes a bit of practice, you know. So if we're doing it one way for 30 years, maybe we need more than 5 minutes practice, and that's okay. You know, it's okay. Not everything has to be completed in 15 seconds or less.
Yeah, that's like a question I was going to ask you, Orlando. Thanks a lot. Like, you know, after you did a lot of training, a lot of your NLP, I suppose it's a good question for anybody that's listening who's starting off as a coach or a practitioner. like how much training do you need before you actually give it a go, you know? Or how did you handle that yourself?
I went to a 3-hour introduction where they overviewed eye access and cues, and we did an exercise on that. And then they linked that to visual, auditory, and kinesthetic language predicates. That's, for example, in a visual language predicate example would be illuminate, to see something. Do you see it in your mind's eye? Or do you get a feel for something? That would be kinesthetic. So that's all the introduction was. I went back to Wellington, and that it was an 8.5-hour bus ride or coach ride. So I had a bit of time. So I literally had a notebook and paper, and I wrote some lists, and they were quite short, of visual, auditory, and kinesthetic words as best as I could. And then I started writing. I would think of what I would say to customers, potential customers, and I'd just write it out how I would normally say it. And then I would write out a sentence, try and say the same thing visually. And then I'd try on saying the same thing auditorily and try on saying the thing. So I might say, do you see what I mean? Are you hearing what I'm saying? Do you get a grasp of what I'm trying to convey? And I did that a lot quicker than I did 25 years ago. Like I needed the whole 8 hours on the bus trip. When I got back to Wellington for the next 4 or 5 weeks after, every day I made an effort to notice what language people were using predominantly, what predicates, and then feed similar predicates back to them to measure the responses. Before I had a chance, and literally, I mean, I only worked for another 6 weeks or so before I transferred to Auckland. I actually quit my job, but they offered me another one, so I decided to stay at the company because they gave me a car, and that was pretty handy. But before I even moved to Auckland, my sales were getting easier. But it hadn't really translated to figures, but it was getting easier and easier to get people. Now, to be fair, and I do say this to anyone in sales, I worked for a really good, the company had a really good product and an excellent service. Okay. You can't make gold out of dog shit. If the product or service that you're selling is, if you know it's bad, then to me, find somewhere else to work, because you're never going to congruently lie to other people about how good something is not. So I didn't have that hurdle. I absolutely knew it was a great product and an excellent service. So all it came down to was, why choose our company instead of the competitor, and what's the price? And I tell you, the price became less and less relevant, which was really cool because I was on commission.
Nice stuff.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely feels great. Yeah. No, because a lot of people they do different courses, loads and loads of courses, and they don't start that you can keep, like, people can continue on doing courses and never actually going out there and doing that. So
look, I have done a buttload of courses. I don't know exactly how many units a buttload is, but it's many. In saying that, my advice to anyone that's starting out is learn something and start doing something with it. Integrate it into your behavior, into your language. Otherwise, doing a short course or doing an introduction or reading a book on something, using none of it and then paying to learn more is not a good plan. It is entirely possible to take what you've learned, integrate it into what you're already doing. Okay. It's a very common thing, especially for an NLP practitioner course, and lots of different modalities. People go and do the course. They have noticed some extreme personal positive change themselves, and they go, oh my God, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life starting next week. I'll quit my job and I'll become a coach. Yeah. Well, suddenly they've got zero resources and they want to start a business. They may never have owned a business before. They may never have run a business before. They may never have done any marketing. They may not know how to sell. And all of that becomes evident about week 8 when they go, hang on, I've still got to pay rent. How rude.
Yeah.
Don't they realize that I'm being amazing? And look, the realities can kick in very quickly and very harshly. I strongly suggest to people, learn. Look, you've got to learn some skills to have something to practice, right?
Yeah.
Gain some skills, get into a group of some description where you are, whether it's co-students or another group where you are interacting with people that have a similar interest of learning, and start coaching each other. When I say coach each other, just learn together. You know, bounce off each other. How do you use this? How do you use it? Oh, well, I use it like this. People will tell you all sorts of cool stuff you hadn't thought of. Use everyone else's brains. It's cool. And share your own. Okay. Very much but my ethos of learn, share, and grow. Learn stuff, share it with other people, and everyone gets to grow. That's a good plan. There are, you know, there does come a point where if you want to start, and I think that point to start earning out of it, if that's your goal, because it depends on different people's goals. If you're just there for personal development, learn what you need to learn, change what you want to change, get on with your life and be happy, right? If you want to integrate it and build a business out of it in some way, shape, or form, make a plan. Know where you're going. And when you've made that plan and you know where you're going, test it with a few people that you know have knowledge. NLP is the study of the structure of subjective behavior, successful behavior. Okay. Find people that are doing what you want to do and ask for their advice. And if required, pay for it. You'll be surprised at how many people, if you approach them and say, hey, I really respect what you're doing. I think what you've done is brilliant. Would you be able to give me a few pointers? Because this is my plan and I really value your advice. Be amazed at how many people give you half an hour of their time just to help you out. Now, obviously, if you want to develop that into an ongoing relationship, there may have to be a reciprocal arrangement of some description, financial or services or something along those lines. But there's many different ways to get around the problem. And throwing money at more training. Look, I've got a folder full of certificates. You know how many clients have ever asked me to see any of my certificates?
None.
Not one. The only people that ever want to see my certification is the insurance company and the local practice. They want to see my certificates, including my insurance certificate, when I want to practice there. So they can say, he is certified this, licensed that, whatever, so that their advertising is proven true. Outside of that, I have never had a client ask me. I've had a few clients ask me about insurance, mainly business related clients, a couple of personal clients, but I've never had anyone saying, well, if you could have you ever been to the doctor and you arrive at your appointment and you walk in and the doctor says, right, take a seat. And before you do, you say, well, hang on a second. Where's your certificate? Until I see your certificate, I don't think you should be doctoring. There's a presupposition that if they're in the doctor's surgery and they've got a badge saying I'm Dr. Bob and they're wearing the Dr. King and they got the whatever it might be, there's the presupposition that they are the doctor, right? What you market yourself as long as you are that thing, by the way, it has to be true. It comes across, you know. People have, look, this is something that you can certainly tune in using NLP skills, but most people have got built-in bullshit detectors. As simple as that. And word gets around pretty quickly when somebody's trying to portray something they are not. It's a lot of work. It's a lot easier just to be awesome as who you are. Like no one's ever going to be who you are. So you might as well be you. It's a lot easier.
Exactly.
And do it really well, be authentic in what you do, come across. And if someone asks you to do something that's not what you do, tell them it's not what I do. But I always try and make a referral. You know, if someone says, oh yeah, can you help me with this? If it's something that it's not in my area of expertise, I'll say to them, look, I'm not the right person for you, but here is who I would send that person. I was having a conversation with someone recently about, I was contacted about a young lady that was self-harming and is anorexic. And that's not my specialty. Okay. Now I've worked with both individually and I've worked with both together. It's my choice not to pursue that as a client base. And I have contact. Well, her name is Debbie Williams. She's based up in Birmingham, and she is absolutely brilliant at working with people with her two fortes are eating disorders and cocaine addictions. And she's phenomenal at both. So that's where I refer to. I want that young lady, the girl that was being referred to me, the mother, the parents that were, I want their daughter to get the best help she can get. You know, that young lady deserves help because she's alive. She's a human. She deserves the best that is available. And I'm not that. And it's okay. I'm okay saying that. Debbie is exquisite at doing something that I have no interest in doing. Of course, I would rather her go there for Debbie's sake, for the young lady's sake, primarily for the parents, the family, the teachers, everyone in contact. It's a terrible, terrible thing. And when the best resources are put towards it, the outcomes are wonderful. And I want a good outcome for her. Meanwhile, I'll go and do what I'm really good at.
Yeah,
I think that's a good plan.
I think so too. I was listening to some chat.
That's brilliant advice, Orlando. Thanks very much. Sorry, that's excellent advice. Thanks very much.
Yeah. And on that, I was listening to some chap, and he was on about, he referred somebody onto another customer about another provider about 20 odd years ago. And because of that integrity, that same client that he didn't see is referring other clients to that guy that referred him off to somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it happens. And yeah. Well, look, at the end of the day, in my model of the world, what's best for the client and what's best for me. You know, I don't want to, I mean, look, I have a busy client load. I enjoy my business very much. I do not want to take on a whole bunch of clients that I'm not particularly brilliant at dealing with in a genre, if you like, or that I do not enjoy doing. That doesn't work for me at all. I love what I do. Why would I go looking for business and doing something I don't want to do? That makes no sense at all. However, I do still care about those people in the sense that I do care that they get good help. Building, again, if you're starting out and learning as in NLP or these related topics, you know, build a network of practitioners, get to know other people that are learning at different levels. A, you'll learn a lot from each other, but B, what we're just talking about now, I'm only able to talk about Debbie Williams because when I arrived in the UK, I was mentoring with Tina Taylor, and we went to Secrets of Hypnosis to assist Paul McKenna and Richard Bandler up in London. And at that event, through those people, I met Debbie, and she was assisting as well. And she's somebody that's in my contact network, and she's brilliant at what she does. You know, well, you know, building a network of people it supports your business. You know, I think it shows a lot of credibility when you say, look, I'm not the right person and this person is. You know, know your topic, and know what is your expertise, know what is not, and have somewhere that you can refer people to. I mean, I've got notes somewhere downstairs with regards to local counselling services. I don't do counselling, okay? And for some people, it's useful. So if that's what's required, I say, hang on, I'll go downstairs and get that list, and I'll give you the details that I have that I would pass on to you. You know, I think it's part of being professional in what you do.
Very much for that.
Cool.
Yeah.
I know Rich asked you earlier on what your favorite technique you use. So I suppose, what was your least favorite technique that you've used?
They're all his favorite.
Yeah.
Well,
Or do you have one?
I don't really have a technique that I don't like, because everything's useful in some context somewhere. But the truth is, since training with Richard Bandler in 2016 when I met him, and since then I've been training with him and assisting his trainings in both Florida and London, I've learned a hell of a lot from Richard. but from that, one of the things that I learned very powerfully there was to turn the model upside down. I mean, in New Zealand, we learned techniques that if you'd practice them enough, you'd gain some skills. And if you then practice those skills enough, then you could build a positive attitude. Well, in Richard's practitioner on the first day, and within the first 30 minutes, he writes on the board, attitude. NLP is an attitude. It starts with curiosity and determination, and you can add anything into it, but definitely start with attitude. It has skills and methodologies that you learn the skills and methodologies. It has a trail of techniques. The technique is the thing that's left behind. It's fit at the end, you've just used one, but it's your skills within that create the techniques. I jokingly say I'm not very good at NLP techniques because I always seem to balls them up. I do them wrong so the client gets the positive result. If I'm doing a particular technique or using the model of a technique with a client and it's not working for the client, it's not, they're having difficulty with it, I'm going to change it. I'm not going to keep banging on while the client's finding it hard. There's no point to that at all. You know, if you're doing a technique that's say a visual a swish pattern, that's a very visual exercise. If the client's really having trouble with that, stop getting them to visualize it and start getting them to move feelings around and move sounds around. You know, do it in a way that works for the client. Just because the manual that you read or the book that you read says blah, 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 as Richard would say, it cracks me up when people say, oh, well, I've got to get a copy of Structure of Magic. Well, it's a great book. I still haven't read it that competently. It's a pain in the ass of a book to read. No offense, Richard. But he wrote it, the first 4 chapters were his dissertation at university, right? It's not an easy read. Now, if someone says to me, you know, what's the best book that Richard's written? Well, he's written like 34 of them, or co-authored a whole bunch of them as well. The first thing I'm going to ask is, what do you want to achieve? If it's just for their own personal development, something they want to do for themselves, I'll tell them to go get Thinking on Purpose. It's the latest book that he's bought for self-development, for self-purpose and use.
Yeah.
Why start 45 years ago? That's when Richard started. Start with where things are at now. You know, who knows what you could be capable of? It doesn't make sense to go back and go, well, he did it this way, I shall do it as difficultly as he did. No, they've made it, you know, both Richard Bandler and John Grinder have done a hell of a lot since they created NLP, and since they went their separate ways, they've been doing different things and they're still creating new things. Well, it doesn't make sense to go back and find the oldest, slowest way that they used to do things. I don't know about John Grinder, but I know for a fact, Richard, there are certain things he used to do. He doesn't even do them like that anymore. He's got better ways of doing them. And he doesn't teach the old way. He teaches by doing the new way, or the way that's most useful most of the time. But while you're learning, again, every process that you're learning, it's the skills that are important, because it's the skills that will give you the flexibility to be able to make shit up for your client. So they are not confined to, here's my technique and I'm going to hit you over the head with it until you fit. You know, it's not a good plan. Now, the thing is, if I have a client that has a phobia, first I'm going to test it. I want to know it's a phobia, not a fear. There is a difference. But once they've convinced me they're having a phobic reaction, which is kind of the fun part for me, provide the stimulus and see what they do. I'm not that mean. But it does give you a good calibration for testing at the end.
You get punched in the face doing that.
Huh?
To get
I work on Zoom, you idiot. Much less bruising. No, look, once you know it's actually a phobia, the first thing I'm going to do is roughly run them through the phobia cure 1, 2, 3 times. I'm going to do that because in my experience, it's about 80 to 85% effective. Job done. Super easy for the client. It's not about whether it's easy or hard for me. It's super easy for the client. If they're in the 15 to 20% bracket that it's not working so good for, I got a whole bunch of other things I can do. but I'm going to do what has the highest probability of assisting the client as easily as possible for them. That's what I'm going to do first. I'm not going to go, well, actually, I just read about this cool technique. It works for 1 out of 1,000 people, but it's great fun as a practitioner. So sit down. No, chunk up, learn big skills, learn language patterns, learn language predicates, then language patterns, Milton model, meta model. Learn these things in big chunks so that you can use them through all areas of your life and practice using them, and become more specific as your use of the skills becomes more specific. There's no point taking a deep dive and spending a year studying meta programs and studying nothing else. Sure, you'll have a great understanding of that. You won't have a hope of using it effectively. I mean, you might find some effective uses for it, but by practicing a broad base of foundational NLP skills, you're going to be a hell of a lot better off. In my opinion.
Yeah, because that's great advice. Because I remember Dr. Richard Banner saying that as well before. Look at my latest stuff. The latest stuff is always because that's why I do the stuff now. It's great.
Oh, look, I learned some awesome skill. There was some awesome techniques and some awesome skills when I did my prac in 1997. I did. They were really, and I've used them effectively over and over again. And sometimes I pull them out of the bag because for a particular client, it's going to be really appropriate for them. I have an idea and go, the latest one that comes to mind was a client. We did an exercise called a circle of excellence, which is basically an anchoring technique, stacking anchors by using a spot on the floor. And I was working with this guy online, and he kept every 15 minutes he would go like this, and then he'd go like, I'd be like, what are you doing? He goes, I can't sit for long, so I put my standing desk up and my standing desk down. I said, if it's easier, just stand. In fact, and then I got him to move the camera, and then we went through this exercise where he was stepping around in his room, and it worked brilliantly for him because he wanted to get a feeling for where he would put himself. One of the phrases he used is, when I'm in social situations, I don't know where to put myself. All right, there. Now you know. Pick a spot in front of you, 1 foot in front of you, step forward into it. You are now there. Now, as crazy as that sounds, he'd never thought of that. He didn't know where to put himself. He was constantly moving around, finding where would be comfortable. But he didn't even know what that meant. So how was he ever going to find it? Start at the finish. I found out from him, what do you want to achieve? I want to be comfortable wherever I am. How will you know when you're comfortable? And he had to go back a long way to find a reference for that in his life. And then when he found that, it was when he got told where to stand, he knew where he stood. So I went, great. Does it matter who tells you where to stand? He said, no. I said, stand there. He went, where? I said, just in front of you, 1 foot in front of you, stand there. And he stood there and went, I went, what happened? He goes, I don't know. It's really comfortable here. I'm like, step back. He stepped back and went, I said, stand forward again. I'm like, great. Now you need to change the voice to your own voice, because I'm not going to be on the phone every time he goes to the pub. Hi, Orlando. I'm just walking to the pub. Where should I stand? Yeah, stand there, mate. Thank you. Well, I mean, it was very, very, we practiced it over and over again. We were laughing and joking about the silliness of it and the reality of it. Because the moment it became silly, he didn't mind doing it because it was just a bit silly, but it was becoming very real for him. And then all we had to do was change it to, all he had to do in the future was look at a spot and say to himself from the back of his head, stand there. The voice, his voice had to come from here. That's how it worked for him. As soon as he did that, all he had to do was step forward. And of course, we built into it, if for any reason that he had to move, he had to pick another specific spot, tell him to stand there. So he just kept doing that. Caught up with, we had 3 sessions together. We were working on a few different bits and bobs. At the 3 session, he said to me, I keep forgetting to tell myself explicitly to stand there, but I keep feeling comfortable. Do you think that's okay? And I said, yes. He said, do you think that's my unconscious taking over that job? I said, well, yes. At the end of the day, if you practice something enough, eventually it becomes unconscious. We did it with walking, we did it with talking, we did it with tying our shoes. I'm a big boy now. I can tie my shoes up without even thinking about it. I don't have to do 2 bunny rabbits' ears that meet together or left over, right and under. I just tie my laces. I don't even know how I do it. I just do it. And he went, oh, I guess that's what's happened. I went, I guess so. Truth is, I have no idea what happened inside his mind and brain. I don't know. I'm guessing that something along those, he practiced something repetitively, found it to be very useful, and he's taken it on as a behavior. That's my analysis of it. And I could be wrong, and it doesn't matter because he's got what he wanted. Great result. This work is awesome fun.
Excellent. Yeah.
You're helping people get what they want, doing cool stuff. This is the greatest job in the world. Just don't tell everybody. Because they'll all want to go and learn stuff.
It's just all over the planet now.
Yeah, well, so am I. Started in New Zealand, I'm now on top of the world, or close enough to it. I'm in England.
Yeah.
We'll call that the top. I know Scotland, Ireland and Scotland are up there. I know. Sorry, guys. You're up higher. Cool.
Now, this is great having you on, Orlando. Thanks very much. Is any more questions, lads, for Orlando before we go?
Well, not so much question. I just wanted to say how delighted I am that you're the first person we got to interview, Orlando.
Our first guest, yeah.
Our first guest on our podcast. Because, of course, it's only for you. The 3 of us wouldn't have met, let alone be here together doing this podcast. So thanks very much for that. And also thanks very much for the influence you've had on my life so far. And I'm sure that's not the end of it. And no, I just really want to say thanks very much, and I'm absolutely delighted that you're here. And I thought that was an excellent overview for anybody that's listening and watching.
You're very welcome, Fintan, and yourself, Mark and Rich. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and it's a wonderful thing for me to see you guys that have met each other, through the meetup, through training and learning together, and you're taking that information and you're now doing something with it. You've learned, you're now sharing, and I really look forward to seeing the 3 of you grow, and I really look forward to seeing what the future does hold for the 3 of you and what you make of it. I think it's very cool. So thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, and I just
thanks very much.
Thanks, Orlando, for your generosity, your time, and being a top bloke as well.
You're very welcome, Rich. All right, guys.
Cheers, dude.
That's a wrap.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Fantastic. You happy with that?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
Very cool. All righty.
So you're going to do your little bit, Fintan?
By scale and lay.
Yeah,
Scale and lay, yeah.
The story of the day. Sure. I myself am from Dublin, and I lived at the foot of the Dublin Mountains. And anytime I'm up there, I ask people, my friends, and that, have they been in the mountains? And they say, well, no, not in years. They look out the window and they say, it's lovely to look at, but we leave it there. So anyway, there last week I do a lot of hiking now. Of course, I'm living in the Midlands, so I do a lot of hiking in the mountains of Leitrim up beyond Ballinamore, the mountain there called Slieve-an-Éireann, the Iron Mountain. And I was very privileged there a couple of weeks ago to bring to go with a group of Ukrainian refugees. What happened was they had been living in the town for a while now, and they were looking at the mountains, but they weren't saying, oh, It's lovely to look at. They, like me, wanted to get out into the mountains. And despite the fact that they didn't speak any English, and I don't speak any Ukrainian, in fact, none of us did. We had one girl there who was from Ukraine, and she did speak English. So she acted as interpreter for the entire group in as best as she could. So for once, I actually spent a hike with people and didn't do as much talking as I usually do, you know. Instead, I spent the time listening to people and to hearing them interact amongst themselves, the tonality of their voices, and watching them as we went up the mountain, you know, watching them struggle at times, you know, as they walked up the mountain. And then as they come around the corner, there'd be a woodland, and you could smell the you know, the smell of the pine. You could hear the birds singing away to themselves. At one stage there was a quarry, and you could see the look on their face as they go around the corner and they see this, and you know, the look of surprise, and just the look of enjoyment, the laughter, the joking amongst themselves. And then occasionally they'd look to us to see, should we go this way, should we go that way, just for a little bit of direction. Anyway, as we went along, we kind of got to know each other a little bit. We talked to each other, and I'd ask a question and they'd answer the question completely wrong, but it didn't matter because they were just talking to us, you know. And it made me realize that there was no real right answer. Questions like, what's the Ukrainian word for rain? And the guy beside me told me that they get rain in the autumn and in the spring, but not in the summer, you know. And I went, that's okay, you know. And lots of little conversations like that. And actually, it was not about the words. It was just about that exchange, that human interaction, you know. Anyway, we made our way down, and at the end, the girl who was acting as interpreter, if you like, for the group, my friend who had organised, who's from Ballinamore, who had organised this, had suggested that we could bring them kayaking. So she explained that to them in Ukrainian. And she, as she was there, I could see two of the kids were looking and they were talking amongst themselves. There was a little bit of apprehension there. And so she asked in Ukrainian for it to be translated, is it a difficult, like, will it be tough going to kayaking, you know? So of course, in the international language of mime, I decided to do my impression of whitewater rafting, you know, and the Eskimo roll. And while I didn't use any words as such, they just laughed and they felt, well, maybe it probably won't be that bad. And the others went, it isn't that bad. It isn't that bad. And they understood. But yeah, it was a great day. And I have to say, I'm looking forward to the next day out and maybe doing a bit of kayaking with them.
Very cool.
Very cool. Thanks for that, Fintan.
That's all. No bother at all.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
Thanks for listening.
We won't have it. We want to get you to explain the meaning. We never explain the meaning of a metaphor, should we? Don't.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Anyway, so thank you all for listening, and hope you really enjoy this edition of NLP Upskill Your Life. And listen out for our next edition in a couple of weeks' time.
Are we going to do an empowering question before we go?
Oh yeah, you can add that on as well.
Yeah. Okay. So from all the information you've got tonight from Orlando, which has been brilliant, thanks a million, Orlando. What way are you going to change this week from last week to make it much better than it was? So from all the great information you've got tonight from the podcast, what way are you going to improve your week next week? Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks, Rich. And thanks
Cheers.